Well, hey everybody, welcome. My name is Darren. I'm one of our pastors at Saddleback Church, and I want to introduce you to a friend of mine. This is Ashlee Eiland, and Ashlee is a pastor. She's a writer and a mom to three kids, and I'm just really excited to be here with you today, Ashlee.
Darren, thank you so much for having me, and hello to
Yeah.
everyone who's watching.
Yeah, it's okay. So just a couple of get to know you questions. So
Sure.
you're a coffee drinker.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, that was an assumption.
Absolutely.
You're a coffee
Yes.
drinker.
Yes. Coffee drinker for sure. Yeah.
Okay, great. Now, what's your order? You Starbucks, not Starbucks?
Not Starbucks. So we
Great.
live in Michigan, and in our city, Madcap coffee is very
Okay.
popular. So we just finished a bag of Madcap, and I am your old classic black coffee drinker. Love black
Beautiful.
coffee. Yeah.
Okay. Great. And then food wise, if I don't know if you eat fast food
Oh.
or not, but if you do, what do you get? What's your jam? What's your order?
Okay, so fast food, we have to go Chick-fil-A all the way.
Good,
I
good.
go for the classic Chick-fil-A sandwich with Polynesian sauce
All
and
right.
fruit on the side. So I try and compensate for the fact that it's not the healthiest of meals by foregoing on the fries
Okay.
and sticking
Okay.
with some
Good
fruit.
option.
Yeah.
I love it. It was funny. I drove so in our city around here, they've been putting in canes everywhere.
Oh, cool.
Well, they put them across the street from Chick-fil-A. Apparently, that's part of their
Oh.
strategy. It's like
Oh.
that's their corporate strategy. But I drove by on Saturday, and Chick-fil-A had double lines. They're being super organized. Drove by Cane's, one person. I
Yeah,
was,
that's right. I don't know if we'll see. Time will tell if that's a good strategy or not.
yeah, no, that's all right. Chick-fil-A is still the right place.
That's right.
Cool. Well, actually, I'd just love to talk to you a little bit. So, during this kind of this new season of parents trying to figure out how do I be mom, dad, teacher, parent, like all of this all in one time.
Sure.
Just looking for some conversation on how do we maybe some new things that we can be teaching and working with our children in, or some things that we could be focusing on. I would just love to hear kind of your thoughts of like um, right now. So you've written a book on kindness.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started reading it, so I'm like chapter 7.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
and I gotta say, I love the way that you write.
Thank you.
It's so I'm trying to think. It's like story engaging, but also then like turns a corner and hits a really strong point. And so it keeps you in the whole time. I love it.
Oh, thanks.
Um, but would just love your thoughts. So maybe we can just start off with talking about kindness a little bit. Like how do we define kindness, and how do we begin teaching that to our children?
Oh, so good. Um, so when I start talking about kindness, I have to distinguish our conventional thoughts of kindness from being nice. I
Mm,
think culturally we get the two mixed up, where a nice gesture is the totality of how we approach the spiritual fruit of kindness. So if we think about the fruit of the spirit and kindness being one of them, then how does that get differentiated from just a nice act? And
okay.
so for me, kindness is really defined as an infused, powerful gift that we are able to operate out of that's beyond ourselves. So this is God's ability to give us his heart in interactions with other people. And I think about stories like Hosea in the Old Testament, all the way to Paul in Ephesians, where we see this word kind all the way throughout, and it's Christos. And so this is the idea of this general humaneness or a loving disposition toward other people. We see God's kindness as marked as merciful. We
Mm,
see it as a humanity restored. So you think about when the people of Israel turned away from God and were unrepentant, it says he led them by the cords of kindness in Hosea back into relationship with himself. And so to me, kindness isn't just our outward act, it's a posture of heart toward God and toward other people that really emulates the heart of God for his creation.
mm,
And so that can be sacrificial and it can be risk taking.
yeah.
It could cost us, it does cost us something to be truly kind to someone else, regardless of how they treat us. And that's why I think it's actually such a powerful concept. It's more powerful, I'd say, than we give it credit for. But in specifically in Ephesians, I love this passage in Ephesians 4. because Paul says to people who are trying to grow into more Christ-likeness, and I think this has something to say to us about parenthood, but he says, be kind to one another, and then tender-hearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you. And so what that says to me as a pastor and as a mom is that I have to pay attention to the condition of my heart. And part of my forming and teaching my kids is in the way of helping them check in with the condition of their heart as well. So
that's good.
How do we avoid hard-heartedness or a callousness of heart, where Paul says, do not be like this other group of people because they are ignorant in God, because they are hard-hearted, and move toward tender-heartedness. And that is the place from which true kindness, I believe, flows.
I love that.
So here's the thing about chaos in this like current moment, Darren, is that I think chaos and this really hard left turn in this moment that we're in right now has the ability, if we're not careful, to actually harden our hearts and to turn us inward, where we go into this self-preservation mode and really try and focus on how do I just get through a day? How do I get through a week? Versus how do I thrive in Christ-likeness through this kind of chaos?
Yeah.
And so for me, I think the number one thing I'd say to parents, if we're going to form our kids into being more kind, even in the midst of chaos and for beyond this current cultural moment, I'd say, how are we displaying our ability to be kind to ourselves?
Oh.
How are we modeling that? So when I wake up in the morning, what are my kids, now that they're home with me 24/7?
Yep.
What are they seeing and observing me say to myself? What are they seeing me say to other people, like my husband, or even on a Zoom call or on the phone? What are they seeing me model in the way of kindness toward how I treat myself or the language I use toward my own character? That's a key. I think I underestimated how important that is, especially for right now, because it used to be that my kids were away from me for 8 hours a day.
Sure.
And my self-talk and my actions were always observed by them, but now they are. So our home and my ability to relate to myself and either receive the fullness of God's kindness toward me and giving myself grace, and seeing the way that my husband and I interact and forgive one another, and get through conflict. We are really their learning lab as they're observing us. So that's just one thing I'd pose as a question for reflection. It's, how are my kids observing me receive God's kindness and treat myself with kindness?
Yeah, that's great.
So that's just self-reflection. But then I think of the environments that we get to teach our kids in as twofold. So we have Ronald Rolheiser says it's the domestic monastery, right? Like now is the time for us to see our homes as the primary space of formation until our kids go back to school. But at home now, I can say, how do my kids observe conflict and how do they observe empathy? So, and really, how are we explicitly talking about those two concepts? So, we can actually invite our kids into conversations around forgiveness. So just before our time together here this morning, I had a conversation with my daughter where I apologized to her and I said, will you forgive me? That's not something I've classically heard growing up, but it's important for me to explicitly ask her forgiveness because I'm teaching her what it means to forgive and to be on the other end of that kind of an exchange. And I'm teaching her that here at home.
Yeah.
Even concepts of mercy, whether your kids are young toddlers like mine or all the way through high school, what does it mean to be merciful at home? You know, we set consequences and boundaries, but how am I showing my kids what it means to be merciful and extend God's kindness in that way in my relationship with them? And then in the bucket of empathy, I think it's good listening. I mean, I don't know about you, but like, it's really a lot harder for me to set dedicated time
Hmm.
when we have like 6 things going on at once. So we've got
Yeah.
like housework to do, we've got phone calls to take, and individual, we've got, my two oldest kids are really close knit. They're only 13 months apart. And so if I have to facilitate something between them, like how do we set aside dedicated time to show our kids that we're listening, and trying to more deeply understand who they are and how they're processing being at home more than they probably ever have been, harder feelings and how they're managing tension. So for my daughter, she wants to be by herself and process alone. For my son, I'm finding he wants to wrestle with my husband more, and that's how he's that's how he's processing his harder emotions. But how
Yeah.
do we take time to truly listen to our kids and have them express the range of feelings in a way that kind of places judgment aside and seeks to understand better?
Yeah. No, you talked about asking your kids some good questions or checking in
Yeah,
with them. What kind of questions, what does that conversation look like for you?
sure. So since our oldest child is only 5 years old, a question we ask a lot is, how's your body feeling?
Oh,
Or,
yeah.
yeah, what? And so it's more about their visceral reactions to things and then
Hmm.
checking with their body, or what kind of feelings is your body holding? And so it teaches them not to place judgment on their own feelings.
Hmm.
It says, my body is holding sadness, or my body's holding angry feelings. And then we get curious and I say, tell me more. Tell me more about why you think your body's holding that feeling. And so I've heard everything from, you're paying more attention to my sister,
Hmm.
to, I just want time with you. I don't want you to work anymore. And so that helps us in a really non-judgmental way get to the root of what our kids are experiencing in this time, because we're processing our chaos in one way, but we also have to recognize that they're processing in myriad ways.
Hmm.
And how do we truly understand that, in asking really good questions, we can have really effective conversations with our kids and help them be kind to themselves and to
Yeah.
make sense of our current moment.
Yep. Man,
Yeah.
so good. Such a good little, my son's the same way. He always says his stomach hurt. That's his go-to. And
Right.
it's like, great. What does your stomach say? That's what we say to him. And then
Yes.
who knows what comes out. But yeah, what's your stomach say? What's going on right now? Tell me why does it feel that way?
Sure.
Such a good question for our younger kids for sure.
Yeah. And it,
Yeah. No, go ahead.
well, I was going to say it works with, and like, I'm sure for a lot of us, our rhythms have been disrupted as well, and we're having to create new ones. And so we're also just leaving space for our kids to create their own new rhythms in a way that brings them life and helps them discover more about who they are. So, for example, nap time is completely thrown off in our house now that they don't have their typical uh, play outside, and
Yeah.
just rhythms look different. But now we just say, okay, if you don't want to fall asleep, that's all right. What does it look like to be creative in your room and
Hmm.
hold creative space? So that way we are helping them um, be okay with change and to not get frustrated, but rather to use that change as an opportunity for more creativity and exploration.
Yeah.
And so part of what kindness is, um, it's turning a shift or a place of tension into an opportunity for growth and curiosity of like, what else could I do in this time? So
Yeah.
my daughter's really loving reading more. She's loving art. uh, I caught her watching a dance video, learning some choreography to
All
some
right.
I'm like, okay, I guess. And that's something I don't think we would have discovered in our old rhythm. And so it's how can we put a new spin on what once was really familiar and now is giving us an opportunity to try new things.
Yeah, it's been beautiful to think about at least, thinking through my family and stuff, like, wow, the lasting effects from these moments, the obviously the potential negatives, but the massive positives that could come out from development formation, just our relationships from these moments. And it's from things like that, just learning,
Yes,
knowing our kids better in a way that we might not have known before.
completely.
It's so potentially so exciting for what this means for, I mean, the
Yes.
rest of our life with our kids. So
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And I'd say too, like, so there's this idea of our home being a key environment for formation, but then there's like what I call just the outside world. And a lot
Hmm.
of how I process life in my own life in the book was through the lens of key moments that may not have been light bulb moments or intentional moments of formation that my parents knew about. They were moments that were meaningful to me, that shaped and formed kind of who I became over the span of time.
Great.
And so I'd say for the outside world, how are we helping our kids make sense of other people's pain,
Hmm.
and the way other people handle conflict? And so when we tried to explain the concept of social distancing to our kids, they wanted to know why. And that was an opportunity for us to create empathy from an outside space to talk to them about the potential for people becoming really sick. And, age appropriate, of course, but, and to say that for right now, like the number one thing that we could do, and according to, what our leaders and officials wanted us to do, is to stay at home. And so that's been really neat watching our kids take that information and through empathy, even bring that into prayer time. So almost every night, one of my kids will say, God, could you heal the people who are sick? And we know that you're a God who can heal. So helping them identify with someone else's pain and turn that into a part of a discipline that we're trying to teach our kids at home, has been really neat to watch. And that's, I mean, just one way that we can help them relate to people outside of our house. But then too, I'd also say the second we are all able to kind of move outside of our homes again and more freely, I'd say now is a great time to take stock of the environments and the opportunities we're purposely setting up for our kids.
Hmm.
I think the number one way that I really appreciate my parents for introducing me to different cultures, to different languages, to different opportunities to see the way that someone else is living.
Hmm.
And I know out on the West Coast, it's such a beautiful, diverse kind of tapestry.
Yeah.
But how are we even more intentionally saying, what could I change on the other side of this where my kids could learn how to hold someone else's reality and rhythm of life with a new appreciation and perspective?
Yeah.
So for our kids, we're thinking through, okay, what does, if our school environment looks one way, what do extracurricular activities look like?
Hmm.
Do we drive to a different part of our city? What kind of books are we introducing at home? My daughter just asked for a book in Spanish. And so even though, I don't speak Spanish, she's wanting to know just more about someone else's language. And we're like, yeah, how do we get more diverse experiences to increase the number of perspectives that our kids are seeing, so that, when they are operating outside of our home, that's helping to build a sense of empathy as well. And we can talk about kindness through that lens too.
Wow. That's amazing. I like that. And do you think some of those things were, so you mentioned taking them to other places. Is that things that you're intentionally doing as a family to try to cultivate that in them?
Yes. Yeah. Because it's really easy to kind of fall into this rhythm of these are just the places that we go and this is what we always do. And I think there's some really beautiful outcomes of tradition and kind of creating rhythms that are familiar to our kids. But I also think there's such a beauty in kind of shaking that up a bit and saying, and taking our kids to this school, we live in this neighborhood, they do these extracurricular activities within a certain mile radius. um, what are they missing out on? Are there different opportunities that we could introduce our kids to? Different people, different cultures, different lifestyles, that could help, form really authentic relationship
Yeah.
perhaps, or to have different kinds of conversations. And as kids grow older, one of the best gifts my parents gave to me was the opportunity to travel,
Hmm.
with the school that I attended. And so that helps, but we have to be intentional about thinking through the kinds of experiences that we want our kids to engage in, and then ask the question, then what shifts in our normal rhythms might we make in order to see those experiences come to fruition? So it's really on us to set up the kind of things that our kids are exposed to, and helping them have intentional conversations and opportunities for kindness in the context of relationship.
Awesome. Man, so good. Thank you for this. I mean, so much like just practical knowledge, tips, all of that. It's going to be great.
Oh, I'm glad.
Maybe
I hope it's helpful.
final word, if you were going to either share something with parents or
Sure.
what's kind of a final word?
So I haven't read all of this book, but I've heard great things. So if there are parents out there who want to dive into some psychology around this, there's a book called How to Raise Kind Kids by Thomas Lickona, Lickona. And he really dives into more of the science and psychology of kindness. So that might be a helpful resource, but just kind of from the heart, I'd say kindness is intentional. Mm. And we will find ourselves in spaces and situations where we have to make the decision, do we choose kindness at the expense of our own comfort or at the expense of what we've known traditionally in order to, just like God does with us, invite us into deeper relationship. And so kindness is intentional, and I think infused with God's power, it can truly be a transformative part of how we live our lives.
I love it. Well, Ashlee, thank you so much. And Ashlee has a book called Humankind, which I love. So yeah, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And just thank you for pouring wisdom into our church, into our family, and into our community. So I appreciate you a ton.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Darren. It was fun.
You got it. All right.